He just wanted to give his daughter a better life, but he walked into a house where silence spoke louder than words. The new job seemed like a godsend until the destinations revealed on their daily routes began to haunt him. At every stop, painful secrets surfaced, and what was once a routine became a ritual of grief. Now he has to decide whether to run from the past or face the pain that is also his own. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Now, let's continue. New York City was waking up as it always did. Noisy, chaotic, indifferent. The congested streets formed an endless river of metal and exhaust, and amidst all that rushing, Ryan Miller walked slowly, the weight of the world on his shoulders. 37 years old, his hair starting to grey prematurely, with dark circles under his eyes that betrayed sleepless nights. He held tightly to the small hand of Laura, his 8-year-old daughter, as they crossed the street toward her school. The little girl said nothing. She never did. It had been 2 years since Laura had stopped speaking. Since that terrible day, their lives changed forever. Ryan looked at her and felt his heart ache. The girl's mother had been taken from them so suddenly, so cruelly, by an illness that not even the best doctors could stop. And Laura, sensitive as she had always been, simply shut down. She locked her voice away inside herself, like someone guarding a secret too painful to speak. Ryan left his daughter at the school gate, waved to the teacher who always greeted him with a compassionate smile, and walked back to the old car parked nearby. A scratched-up white Corolla, with over 125,000 miles on it. It was all he had. That car, his daughter, and a bank account that never stayed in the black for more than 3 days at a time. He had been working as a rideshare driver for over a year, ever since he lost his job as a graphic designer at a small agency in the West Village. The economic downturn spared no one, and Ryan was one of the first to be let go. He tried to find something else in his field, but nothing came up. The bills piled up. The rent was late. The fridge was always empty. And the worst part was seeing Laura getting thinner, sadder, more distant. That's when Maria, his next-door neighbor, showed up with news that seemed too good to be true. She worked as a cook in a huge mansion on the Upper East Side and had overheard her boss saying she was looking for a private driver. The salary was insane, something around $110,000 a year, plus a food allowance, a transit pass, and health insurance. Ryan almost laughed when he heard it. Nobody paid a driver that much, but Maria insisted. She said the boss was demanding, strict, and that no driver ever lasted more than 2 weeks. Some only made it 3 days. The last one had walked out mid-shift, saying he couldn't take the silence, the coldness anymore. Ryan thought fast. If he could just last 6 months, he could pay off all his debts, buy a better car, and secure a more stable future for Laura. It was worth a shot. The interview was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Ryan put on the only dress shirt he still owned, used his neighbor's borrowed iron, and showed up at the mansion's gate, promptly at 8 in the morning. The place was impressive. High walls, immaculate gardens, a modern glass and concrete structure that looked more like an art gallery than a home. He was greeted by a serious, middle-aged house manager who led him to a massive living room, all white, with minimalist furniture and as silent as a tomb. He waited for nearly half an hour until she appeared. Helen Carter, the Ice Queen, as Maria had called her, and the nickname fit. She was around 45, with straight black hair pulled back in a perfect bun, elegant clothes in shades of grey and black, and an empty gaze that seemed to look right through people without really seeing them. There was no warmth in that face, no life. The interview was brief, technical, cold. She asked about his experience, criminal record, and availability. Ryan answered everything honestly. He said he was a widower, that he had a young daughter, that he desperately needed this job. Helen showed no emotion. She just nodded, picked up a folder from the table, and handed it to him. "You start tomorrow at 7 a.m., she said, her voice as smooth as the marble walls. "The schedule is Monday through Saturday. We will make 5 trips a day, always the same ones. Do not ask questions. Do not try to talk to me. Just drive. If you last a month, you'll get a bonus. If you don't, you'll be dismissed without notice." Ryan left, not knowing whether to celebrate or worry. The salary was real. The contract was there, signed and notarized. But there was something deeply unsettling about that woman, that house, that job. He went back to the small apartment he shared with Laura, made a simple dinner of pasta with tomato sauce, and spent the whole night thinking about what lay ahead. The next day it began. At 7 on the dot, Ryan pulled the impeccable black Mercedes from the mansion's garage and waited. Helen came down at exactly 7:05, got into the back seat without a good morning, and handed him a piece of paper with 5 addresses. Nothing more. He looked at the list, programmed the GPS, and started driving. The first destination was a public school in Queens, an old abandoned building with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. Helen got out of the car, walked to the rusty iron gate, stood there for exactly 15 minutes staring inside, and came back. She said nothing. Ryan didn't ask. The second place was an art studio in Greenwich Village. The space had been closed for years, according to the faded sign on the facade. Helen went inside, ran her fingers over the dust-covered tables, looked at the canvases leaning against the walls, and stood there for half an hour in absolute silence. Ryan waited in the car, uneasy. The third destination was a cemetery in Brooklyn. Helen walked slowly among the tombstones, stopped in front of a specific one, knelt on the grass, and stayed there for a full hour. Ryan watched her from a distance, feeling a tightness in his chest. He knew what that was. He knew what it was like to visit a place where someone you loved was forever absent. The fourth address was a law firm on Fifth Avenue. Helen went in alone, stayed inside for 40 minutes, and came out with the same empty expression as always. Ryan started to see a pattern. Each place had a story. Each stop was an open wound. The fifth and final destination was the strangest of all. A tree. Just a tree in a small quiet park near Central Park West. But it wasn't just any tree. The trunk had deep marks, dark scars that looked like they had been made by something violent. Helen sat on the bench in front of it, staring intently at that tree as if she were waiting for it to say something. She stayed for 2 hours. Ryan waited. When they returned to the mansion, it was almost 4 in the afternoon. Helen got out of the car without a word and went inside. Ryan parked the car in the garage and just sat there, exhausted, confused, unsettled. What was this? Why would someone make this trip every single day? What was she looking for? In the following days, the routine repeated itself. Exactly the same. Abandoned school, dusty studio, cemetery, law firm, scarred tree. Always at the same time, always with the same silence. Ryan began to understand why the other drivers couldn't take it. It wasn't the silence that hurt. It was witnessing the pain of someone who refused to heal. But he stayed. He stayed because he needed the money. He stayed because, in some strange way, he understood this woman. He had his own rituals of grief, too. He also visited absence every day, just in different ways. He would look at the empty bedroom where his wife used to sleep. He would run his hand over her clothes still hanging in the closet. He would listen to the songs she loved while driving alone through the city. The difference was that Ryan had Laura, and Laura needed him to be alive, present, functional. He couldn't afford to freeze the way Helen had. But watching that woman every day, Ryan started to feel afraid. Afraid that if he wasn't careful, he would turn to ice too. A week passed, 2 weeks. Ryan kept going. The salary hit his account, real, substantial, liberating. He paid the back rent, bought real food for Laura, took her to a toy store and let her pick something out. Laura chose colored pencils, a huge set with 120 different colors, and that night, for the first time in months, Ryan saw his daughter smile as she drew. But the smile didn't last long. Laura still wasn't speaking. She kept drawing those dark images. Houses without doors, people without faces, trees without leaves. Ryan would take the drawings to the psychologist, who said it was normal, that it was her process, that one day her voice would return. But when? Ryan wondered every night. When? It was in the 3rd week that something shifted. Helen, for the first time, looked at Ryan through the rearview mirror and asked a question. "Do you have children?" Ryan almost crashed the car in surprise. "Yes," he answered, trying to keep his voice steady. "A girl, 8 years old." Helen was silent for a long moment, and then she said something that left Ryan speechless. Mine was 8 too. Was. Past tense. Ryan swallowed hard. He understood everything at once. The school, the studio, the cemetery, the law firm, the tree. It all made sense now. A terrible, sad kind of sense. This woman was retracing the steps of a daughter who was no longer there. A daughter who somehow had been taken far too soon. Ryan said nothing. He just kept driving. But something inside him changed in that moment. He looked at Helen with new eyes, no longer with strangeness or discomfort, but with compassion. Because he knew what it was like to lose someone you had sworn to protect forever. He knew what it was like to wake up every day and realize the most important person in your life was gone. And it was in that moment that Ryan made a decision. He was going to stay. Not just for the money, but because, in some strange and painful way, he felt that this was where he needed to be. Because maybe, just maybe, by witnessing Helen's grief, he could learn to better deal with his own. Are you enjoying this story? Tell me your opinion of it and how you think it will end. The following weeks brought a subtle but noticeable change. Helen continued her rigid routine, the same 5 places, the same silence. But every now and then, through the rearview mirror, Ryan would catch her gaze resting on him for a few extra seconds. It wasn't invasive. It was almost as if she were trying to understand who this man was, who, unlike all the others, had stayed. Ryan, for his part, began to observe more. Not intrusively, but with the attention of someone who recognizes their own pain in another's. At the abandoned school, he noticed that Helen always touched the main doorframe before leaving, as if saying goodbye to someone. At the studio, she would sometimes pick up a forgotten paintbrush from a table and hold it between her fingers like a sacred relic. At the cemetery, she always left fresh flowers, always the same kind. Yellow sunflowers that contrasted with the sadness of the place. At the law firm, Ryan never knew what she did inside, but he noticed she always came out looking more dejected, as if each visit reopened a wound that would never close. And at the scarred tree, that strange and silent place, Helen would sit, motionless, sometimes for hours, just staring. Ryan began to understand that this wasn't just a route of visits, it was a ritual of penance, a way of punishing herself for something she believed she should have prevented. It was on a rainy Thursday that everything truly began to change. Laura had woken up with a fever, and Ryan had no one to leave her with. Maria, the neighbor, had gone upstate to care for her sick mother. The school was closed for a city-wide holiday, and Ryan had to work. He needed that job more than anything. He called Helen, nervous, explaining the situation. He expected to be fired on the spot, or at least receive a cold, bureaucratic response. But Helen just said, in that same neutral voice, "Bring her." Ryan was speechless. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Bring her," she repeated, and hung up. Ryan put Laura in a clean dress, fixed her hair, grabbed her backpack full of colored pencils and drawing pads, and went to the mansion. When he arrived, Helen was already waiting at the door. She looked at Laura for a long moment, and for the first time in weeks, Ryan saw a crack in that icy mask. Helen's eyes filled with something he couldn't define, pain perhaps, or longing, or both mixed together. Laura looked back at Helen without fear, in that silent, profound way that children have. She said nothing, of course. She just held her father's hand and got into the car when instructed. Helen got into the back seat, as always, and the journey began. But this time was different. Laura, who was usually quiet and introspective, opened her backpack and started to draw. Ryan watched through the rearview mirror, his attention split between the traffic and his daughter. And that's when he noticed something extraordinary. Helen was watching too, not casually but intently, as if mesmerized by the movements of Laura's small hand on the paper. When they arrived at the abandoned school, Laura got out of the car with her father and stood beside him while Helen performed her ritual. But this time, instead of just looking at the empty building, Helen looked at Laura. And Laura, without a word, began to draw. She drew the school, but not as it was now, dilapidated and sad. She drew it as it could be, with colorful windows, children playing. In the yard, flowers in the garden beds. Helen took the drawing from Laura's hands and stared at it for so long that Ryan thought she had frozen again. But then, something unexpected happened. A single tear rolled down Helen's face. Just one. Small, almost imperceptible. But it was there. She handed the drawing back to Laura, gently touched the girl's head, and returned to the car. No one said a word. But something profound and irreversible had happened in that moment. At the studio, Laura did the same thing. She drew the space full of color, canvases, and life. At the cemetery, she drew flowers. Lots of flowers, covering the ground like a garden. Helen looked at each drawing as if she were receiving messages from a distant place, from a time that no longer existed, and with each drawing, she seemed a little less frozen, a little more human. When they reached the scarred tree, Laura stood for a long moment, just observing. Ryan noticed she was thoughtful, focused, and then, for the first time, the girl did something he didn't expect. She walked over to Helen, took her hand, and led her to the tree. She said nothing. She just stood there holding hands with this woman who was practically a stranger, looking at the scars on the trunk. Helen didn't pull her hand away. She didn't move back. She stood there, holding Laura's small, warm hand, and for the first time in 3 years, she allowed someone to enter her pain. Ryan watched it all from a distance, his heart aching, knowing he was witnessing something rare and sacred. That night, when he took Laura home, the girl drew one more time. But this time it was different. She drew a woman and a little girl, holding hands under a tree. And for the first time in 2 years, the people in Laura's drawing had faces. Faces with eyes, with mouths, with expressions, faces that were smiling. Ryan kept that drawing as if it were the most precious thing in the world, because he knew it was. It was the beginning of something, a slow thawing for both Helen and Laura, two broken people who somehow were beginning to heal each other. In the following days, Helen asked that Laura continue to come along. Ryan was surprised but didn't question it. Every day the girl got into the car with her backpack full of colored pencils and drew. And every day Helen watched. Sometimes she would take the drawings, sometimes she would just observe from afar. But there was always that attentive gaze, that genuine interest. It was on a Tuesday that Helen finally broke her silence more deeply. She asked Ryan about Laura's mother. What had happened? Ryan swallowed hard. No one ever asked about that. People were afraid to touch the subject, as if sadness were contagious. But Helen asked, and Ryan, for the first time in a long time, spoke. He talked about how they met in college, about how she was cheerful, vibrant, full of life, about how the illness arrived suddenly, silent and cruel, and took everything away in less than a year. He talked about how Laura was only 6 when it all happened, about how the little girl watched her mother fade away slowly day after day, until one day she was simply gone, and about how, since then, Laura had kept her voice locked inside her, like a treasure that could no longer be shared. Helen listened to it all in silence, and when Ryan finished, she told her own story, for the first time. Her voice was choked with emotion, but firm. Her daughter's name was Sophia. She was 8 when it happened. She was a brilliant, creative girl, full of dreams. She loved to paint, loved to draw, loved to transform the world around her with colors and shapes. She attended that public school because Helen believed that a quality education didn't have to be expensive. She painted at that studio every Saturday with a teacher who saw a rare talent in her. Sophia had plans. She wanted to use the family's fortune to help people. Not to build mansions or luxury towers, but to create community spaces, affordable housing, quality public schools. She used to say that money only made sense if it could transform the lives of those who needed it most. And Helen, too busy with business and meetings, always said yes, that one day they would do it, but not now, later, when there was time. But time ran out. On a rainy day, 3 years ago, Sophia was coming home from the studio with the driver Helen had hired. The man was new, inexperienced, and drove too fast. He lost control of the car on a curve. He hit that tree. The driver survived with minor injuries. Sophia wasn't so lucky. The law firm was where Helen went every week to review the documents for the lawsuit she had filed against the transportation company. Not for the money, but because she needed something to blame, something to hate, something to give meaning to that senseless loss. And the daily trips were Helen's way of punishing herself, of remembering, of refusing to move on. Because moving on felt like a betrayal. It felt like saying Sophia's life didn't matter, that she could be forgotten, and Helen wouldn't forget. Ryan listened, tears in his eyes. He understood everything. The abandoned school was where Sophia studied, which had closed due to lack of funding. The studio that was shut down when the teacher moved away. The cemetery where she rested. The law firm where guilt was processed legally. And the tree where it all ended. "But it wasn't your fault," Ryan said, his voice hoarse. "It was an accident." Helen shook her head. "It was. I should have been with her that day. I should have hired a more experienced driver. I should have listened to her dreams while she was still here. I should have done so many things I didn't do." Ryan didn't know what to say, because he carried similar guilts. Guilt for not noticing his wife's symptoms sooner. Guilt for not insisting she get tested. Guilt for not being able to save her. Guilt for still being alive when she wasn't. But looking at Laura in the back seat, drawing once again, Ryan realized something. Children don't carry guilt. They carry love. And maybe that's what Helen needed to see, that love doesn't die with absence, it transforms. It continues. And maybe, just maybe, that's what Laura was trying to show through those drawings, that even in the saddest places, there was still room for color, for life, for hope, and that sometimes healing doesn't come from erasing the pain, but from transforming it into something that honors the one who is gone. Helen looked at Laura's drawings scattered on the seat beside her. Each one was a message, a bridge between the past and the future, between loss and possibility. And for the first time in 3 years, Helen began to imagine that maybe, just maybe, there was still a way back to life. It was on a Saturday morning, almost 2 months after Ryan started working for Helen, that the first real change happened. Helen called him earlier than usual and asked him to bring Laura. But this time it wasn't for the usual route. It was for something different. When they arrived at the mansion, Helen was waiting in the living room, but she wasn't alone. A man in a suit stood beside her, elegant, with graying hair and a kind look. Ryan vaguely recognized him. It was Michael Anderson, the lawyer from the firm. Helen visited every week. "Ryan, Laura, please sit down," Helen said, her voice sounding different, less cold, more human. "I want to talk to you about something important." Ryan sat on the white sofa, pulling Laura close. The girl, as always, was silent, but her curious eyes watched everything intently. Helen took a deep breath before she began to speak. "You know that Sophia had dreams," she began, looking directly at Ryan. "Big, generous, transformative dreams. She wanted to use our family's resources to build something that truly mattered. Homes for those who have nowhere to live, schools for children who deserve a quality education, community spaces where people can meet, learn, and grow together." She paused, and Ryan saw that her eyes were shining. Not with sadness, but with something new. Determination, perhaps, or purpose. "I spent 3 years frozen," Helen continued. "I spent 3 years retracing the same steps, visiting the same places, punishing myself for something I can't change. But in the last 2 months, since Laura started coming with me, something has changed. I started to see possibilities where I only saw endings." Laura, who was drawing in her notebook as she always did, stopped and looked at Helen. It was a deep, attentive look, full of an understanding that went beyond her years. "I want to make Sophia's dreams come true," Helen announced, her voice firm. "I want to transform each of those places into something alive, something that truly honors her memory. And I want you to be a part of it." Ryan was speechless. The lawyer, Michael, opened a briefcase and began to explain. Helen had made some major decisions in recent weeks. She had decided to sell some of her commercial properties, the luxury towers she had built over the years with only profit in mind. The money would be used to create a foundation, the Sophia Carter Foundation. Half of the family's fortune would be dedicated to social projects. The abandoned school would be renovated and turned into a community center with a library, art room, and sports court. The studio would become a free art school for low-income children and teenagers. Part of the money would be used to build decent, affordable housing with quality infrastructure. And everything would be done in Sophia's name so that people would know these spaces existed, because an 8-year-old girl believed the world could be a better place. "But I need help," Helen said, looking directly at Ryan. "You were a graphic designer, right?" Michael told me. "I need someone who understands creation, communication, turning ideas into a visual reality. I want you to be the creative director of the foundation. I want you to help me give shape to Sophia's dreams." Ryan felt the world spin. Creative director of a foundation with unlimited resources, doing something that truly mattered. It was everything he had ever wanted but never imagined was possible. I don't know what to say," he murmured. "Say yes," Helen replied, and for the first time in 2 months, Ryan saw something that looked like a smile on her face. Small, shy, but real. Ryan looked at Laura, who was holding her latest drawing. It was a picture of 2 females, an adult and a child, holding hands, surrounded by flowers, and above them, written in the shaky handwriting of an 8-year-old, was one word: hope. He scooped his daughter into his arms, held her tight against his chest, and said yes. The following months were a period of intense transformation. Ryan threw himself into the work with a passion he hadn't felt in years. He created the foundation's visual identity, developed communication campaigns, and coordinated teams of architects and designers to renovate the spaces. For the first time since losing his wife, he felt his life had purpose again. Laura changed too. She started attending the new school Helen had enrolled her in, a quality private institution with teachers who specialized in children with communication difficulties. The psychologist was optimistic. She said Laura was progressing, that her drawings were more vibrant, more colorful, more full of hope. And Helen was different, completely different. The mansion, once as cold and silent as a museum, began to come to life. Helen hired a decorator to bring color, plants, and warmth to the space. She opened the curtains that had always been drawn. She let the sunlight in. She also started having people over. Michael, the lawyer, came for dinner often. He was a widower too, Ryan discovered, and had been a close friend of Sophia's. The two would talk for hours about the girl, about their memories of her, about how important it was to keep the essence of what she represented alive. But the deepest connection was with Laura. Helen began inviting the girl to spend weekends at the mansion. Together they would paint, draw, create. Laura taught Helen how to see the world through a child's eyes again, and Helen taught Laura that it was possible to survive the most painful losses and still find reasons to move forward. It was on a Sunday afternoon, as the two were drawing in the mansion's newly renovated garden, that something extraordinary happened. Laura was focused, painting a tree full of colorful flowers, when she suddenly stopped. She looked at Helen for a long moment, and then, for the first time in 2 years, she opened her mouth and spoke. She wanted to help, Laura said, her voice hoarse from disuse. Helen dropped the paintbrush she was holding. Ryan, who was inside the house reviewing some plans, heard her and came running. Tears streamed down his face, tears of joy, of relief, of gratitude. "Who, sweetie?" Helen asked softly, kneeling in front of Laura. "Who wanted to help?" "Sophia," Laura replied, looking directly into Helen's eyes. "I saw her in my dreams. She said she wanted to help people, and that you're doing the right thing, that she's happy." Helen broke down. She cried as she hadn't cried in 3 years. She cried all the tears she had held back, all the pain she had accumulated, all the guilt she had carried. And Laura, that small, wise child, just held her hand and stood there, silent again, but a different kind of silence, a silence of comfort. Ryan hugged them both, and for the first time in a long time, he felt that maybe everything made sense. The losses, the pain, the twisted paths life had taken. Maybe it had all been necessary to get to this point, for 3 broken people to find each other and begin to rebuild themselves together. That night, Helen insisted that Ryan and Laura have dinner at the mansion. It was the first time the grand dining table, which had previously been just for show, was truly used. Marilda, the house manager who had worked there for years, prepared a simple but delicious meal, and for the first time, That huge, cold house felt like a home. During dinner, Helen made a proposal that left Ryan speechless. "I want you to come live here," she said. "This house is too big for me alone, and you're already family." Ryan didn't know what to say. It was too generous, it was too intimate. But looking at Laura, who had a genuine smile on her face for the first time in so long, he realized it might be exactly what they all needed. "Not as employees," Helen clarified, as if reading his mind. "As family. Laura can have the room that was Sophia's. You can have the suite on the second floor. We can turn this house into what it always should have been, a place full of life, laughter, and love." Ryan looked at his daughter. Laura nodded, still smiling, and he knew there was no other possible answer but yes. In the following days, they moved in. It was strange at first, adjusting to the enormous space, to the new reality. But slowly, the strangeness gave way to comfort. Laura decorated her room with her drawings. Ryan set up a small office where he worked on the foundation's projects. Helen started cooking occasionally, something she hadn't done in years, and together, the three of them began to build something new. Not a replacement for what was lost, but an addition, a new configuration of family. Different, but real. Imperfect, but full of love. The inauguration of the Foundation's first project was scheduled for 3 weeks later. It would be the renovation of the public school, now transformed into a community center. Helen was nervous. It would be the first time she would speak publicly about Sophia since the accident, the first time she would transform her private grief into something public, something that could inspire others. Ryan helped her write the speech. Laura made the drawing that would be used on the inauguration banner, and Michael handled all the legal and bureaucratic details. Everything was ready. Everything was right. But the fear was still there, silent, whispering that maybe it was too soon, that maybe she wasn't ready. It was Laura who reassured her. The night before the inauguration, the girl came into Helen's room holding a new drawing. It was a simple image. 2 girls, one blonde, one brunette, holding hands, smiling. And underneath, written in Laura's increasingly steady hand, was a sentence. "We are never alone when we have love in our hearts." Helen kept that drawing as if it were the most precious thing in the world, because it was. It was proof that healing was possible, that love survived loss, that even on the darkest days there was still light if you knew where to look, and that sometimes that light came from where you least expected it, from the small hands of a child who also knew pain, but who chose every day to believe in hope. The day of the inauguration dawned bright and sunny, as if the sky itself were celebrating the moment. Ryan woke up early, both nervous and excited. He put on the new suit he had bought for the occasion, helped Laura into the yellow dress she had chosen, and they went downstairs for breakfast together. Helen was already in the kitchen, also dressed elegantly, but with a visible nervousness in her trembling hands as she made coffee. Ryan gently touched her shoulder. "It's going to be okay," he said with a reassuring smile. "She'll be proud of you." Helen nodded, but her eyes were filled with unshed tears. 3 years. 3 years of silence, of isolation, of pent-up grief. And now she was about to turn all of that into something public, something that would have a real impact on the lives of hundreds of people. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. The community center was in Queens, where the abandoned public school Helen used to visit religiously once stood. Now, the building was completely transformed. The walls were painted in vibrant colors, the broken windows were replaced, and the yard had new gardens and benches. There was a library with thousands of donated books, classrooms equipped for art, music and theater workshops, a renovated sports court, and even a community kitchen that would offer free meals to local children. When they arrived, dozens of people were already waiting. Neighborhood residents, city, officials, journalists, curious children. Ryan's heart pounded. This was real. It was actually happening. Michael greeted them at the entrance, giving Helen a warm hug. "Everything's ready," he said. "People are excited to learn about the foundation, to meet you." Helen took a deep breath. Laura squeezed her hand, and that simple gesture gave her the courage she needed. Together, they went inside. The ceremony began with Michael making the official introductions, explaining the foundation's story, its goals and future projects. But everyone was waiting for the moment Helen would take the makeshift stage that had been set up in the yard. When it was her turn, Helen walked slowly to the microphone. She looked at the crowd, then at Laura, who was sitting in the front row next to Ryan. The little girl smiled and waved, and that was enough. "My name is Helen Carter," she began, her voice choked but firm. "And I'm here today to talk about the most important person who ever lived in my life. My daughter, Sophia." The silence was absolute. All eyes were on her. "Sophia was 8 years old when she passed away," Helen continued, managing to say those words in public, for the first time without completely breaking down. "She was creative, intelligent, generous. She loved to paint, loved to learn, loved to dream. And her biggest dream was to use our family's resources to help people. She used to say that money only made sense if it could transform lives." Helen paused, wiping away the tears that were now flowing freely. "For 3 years, I was frozen. I was trapped in a cycle of pain and guilt that seemed endless. I thought that moving on would be a betrayal of her memory, that forgetting even for a moment would be like saying she didn't matter. But I was wrong." She looked directly at Laura. "A very special little girl taught me something fundamental. She taught me that love doesn't die. It transforms. That honoring those who are gone isn't about staying stuck in the past, but about turning pain into something that helps others. That makes the world a better place." Helen took a deep breath before continuing. "That's why I created the Sophia Carter Foundation. To fulfill the dreams she didn't have time to fulfill herself. This community center is just the beginning. We will renovate other spaces, build decent housing for families in need, create opportunities for children who deserve a better future. We will do everything Sophia dreamed of doing." She paused, looking at the renovated building behind her. "Sophia studied at this school. She sat at these desks. She played in this yard, and now this place has life again. It is once again what she always wanted it to be, a space for learning, for growth, for community." The audience was visibly moved. Several people were crying openly. And then something unexpected happened. Laura stood up from her chair and walked toward the stage. Ryan tried to stop her, but Michael touched his arm, signaling for him to let her go. The girl carefully climbed the steps, walked over to Helen, and took the microphone. The silence was now one of anticipation. Everyone knew Laura had difficulty speaking. Ryan had mentioned it to Michael, who had shared it with a few people, but no one expected what happened next. "She wanted to help," Laura said, her voice clear and firm, without hesitation. "Sophia. She told me in my dreams that she wanted to help everyone. And Aunt Helen is doing it. She's doing what Sophia wanted." Helen dropped to her knees beside Laura, hugging the girl tightly, and the crowd erupted in applause. It wasn't polite, formal applause. It was genuine, emotional applause from people who recognized the courage of these two in transforming their pain into something greater. The ceremony continued with the official ribbon cutting and a tour of the new spaces. Neighborhood kids ran inside, curious and excited about the new library, the colorful rooms, the available art supplies. Parents expressed their gratitude with tears in their eyes. Volunteer teachers introduced themselves, offering to help. Life was pulsing where there had once been only neglect. That afternoon, after most of the people had left, Helen, Ryan and Laura stayed in the community center's garden. They sat on a new bench under a tree that had been planted especially for the inauguration. A yellow flowering tree, which would be in full bloom in a few months. "Sophia would have planted this tree," Helen said softly, looking at the still slender branches. "She loved trees. She said they were a symbol of hope because they grow slowly, but always upward." Laura took out her sketchbook and began to draw the tree, but this time she drew it already in bloom, full of color, full of life. And next to the tree she drew 3 people, a woman, a man and a little girl, together. Ryan looked at the drawing and felt a surge of emotion. Those 3 people on the paper were them. They were the strange, unlikely family they had become, not because they were replacing those they had lost, but because they had chosen to carry on together, transforming pain into love. In the following months, life settled into a new routine. Ryan worked every day on the Foundation's projects, developing fundraising campaigns, creating communication materials, and coordinating teams. Laura returned to school with enthusiasm, made new friends, and started talking more and more, though she still sometimes preferred silence. And Helen became a different woman, still serious, still elegant, but with a human warmth that hadn't existed before. The Foundation's second project was the transformation of the old art studio into a free school for painting and sculpture. The third was the construction of a high-quality, low-income housing complex, and slowly the name Sophia Carter became known not as the girl who was taken too soon, but as the inspiration behind a real social transformation. Helen stopped visiting the 5 places every day, not because she had forgotten, but because she learned that honoring Sophia's memory wasn't about being trapped in the past, but about building the future she would have wanted. Ryan discovered that it was possible to love again, not in the same way, not with the same intensity that he had loved his wife, but in a new, gentle way that grew slowly like the roots of a tree. He and Laura's teacher, Clara, started meeting for coffee. Nothing serious yet, nothing rushed, just the possibility that maybe, one day, his heart could open again, and Laura blossomed. She began to speak naturally, to smile, to be a child again, but she never lost the old wisdom that premature grief had brought her. She understood things other children didn't. She understood that life was fragile, that love was precious, that every moment mattered. 1 year after the inauguration of the first community center, the Sophia Carter Foundation had already transformed the lives of over 1,000 families. There were 5 community centers in operation, 3 housing complexes built, and dozens of social projects underway. At the Foundation's 1-year anniversary party, Helen made an important announcement. She was donating the Upper East Side mansion to become the Foundation's official headquarters. She, Ryan, and Laura were moving to a smaller, cozier house, more suitable for the family they had become. "Life doesn't erase the pain," Helen said in her speech that night. "It doesn't make the longing disappear. It doesn't replace who we've lost. But life offers us the chance to transform that pain into something that matters, to ensure that those who are gone live on through the actions they inspired." She looked at Laura, who was standing beside her, holding a bouquet of yellow sunflowers. "And sometimes," she continued, "life offers us the right hand at the right time, a small hand, from a child who also knows pain, who also knows what it's like to lose, but who chooses every day to believe that it's still worth it to bloom." The audience applauded, but the most important moment wasn't happening on the stage. It was happening in the side garden, where Ryan and Laura were planting a new tree together. A yellow flowering tree, which would be in bloom in a few months, which would be strong in a few years, which would be majestic in a few decades, providing shade and flowers for future generations. Helen joined them. The 3 of them stood there in silence, looking at the small tree that still had its whole life ahead. And Ryan thought that maybe this was exactly what life was, a constant planting of hope, a daily choice to believe that, even after the most violent storms, it is still possible to bloom. Laura held Helen's hand with one hand, and her father's with the other. And there in that quiet garden, under the starry New York sky, 3 people, whom life had broken, chose to continue, together, transformed, alive. Because sometimes it's in our moments of deepest despair that life offers us the right hand, not always to save us, but to remind us that, despite all the pain, we can still bloom. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Helen, Ryan, and Laura has touched your hearts deeply. If you were moved by this journey of pain, resilience, and new beginnings, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment resonated with you the most. Did you identify with any of the characters? How do you deal with loss and new beginnings in your own life? Every day we bring you intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, make us reflect on our own paths, and remind us that we are never alone in our struggles. We'll see you in the next episode with a new story that will touch your soul.